Hey everyone, my name is Ryan Doble and today we are taking a look at this camera here. This is the Braun D310. It is quite an interesting camera because this camera does not exist. Well, okay, no, it does exist, but it doesn't exist on the internet. If you search up the name in quotations, I was only able to find 2 articles which I was able to read and find information about this camera. One of the articles isn't directly even about this camera, it's about the cameras that were released around that time, and it was just mentioned once in it. And then the other article was a review which was not detailed at all. It didn't really give any information about this camera and it wasn't really a full-on proper review. So that's what I'm going to be doing today. I'm going to be showing you guys this camera now in 2024. It was released back in 2006, I believe. Now, again, this is just an estimate because I wasn't able to get too much information about this camera online. Well, to be honest, like 2006 also makes sense given the amount of technology that is inside of here. It couldn't be any later than that. It could be earlier. It is only 3.1 megapixels, and in 2006 we did see cameras with higher megapixel counts like 5. But this feels and seems like it would have been a cheaper camera of the day. 3 megapixels totally makes sense for 2006 as well for this. Anyways, let's first take a look at the sample photos so that you can see for yourself what the quality looks like out of this camera, and then we'll get into the build quality. We'll get into more technical things like the batteries and the SD cards that this takes, a little bit about its quirks, different features, that kind of thing. Here's some photos, let's take a look. Okay, what did you think? They're kind of interesting, right? I mean, they have a very unique look to them for sure. They don't have deep blacks in the photos, which is kind of interesting because it gives it this like, and I say this a lot for these old CCD point and shoots that I review, it gives it a film-like look. It's a very unique feeling that you get out of this, and more than anything, this gives me dispo camera vibes, like disposable film camera feel. Except it's got unlimited shots, which is kind of cool. Now comparing this to quality of cameras that you find nowadays, it definitely has a lot of character. That doesn't mean that it's good quality, but it definitely does have character. So if you post a photo on your Instagram, it's gonna look totally different than everyone else's who shoots photos with an iPhone. iPhones do have this slightly clinical appearance. I mean, you can create good photos with iPhones too, but just if you take one and snap it, it's nothing really creative. This camera does create a unique creative look every single time you take a photo. I mean, especially nowadays when you see no more people taking photos with cameras like these, it even more so creates an interesting aesthetic. To me personally, I find it really fun shooting with this kind of camera and pretty much any other camera of this type. I did review a very similar camera, which reminds me quite a bit of this one. It's the HP Photo Smart. I forgot the exact model number, but you should check it out. It's right up here. And it's very interesting how this feels almost very similar to that. Now, this definitely has slightly less features than that one does. Now, this camera is slightly different as it has a fixed focus lens here and a fixed focal length as well. So if you want to open up the lens, you can flip it here, opens the lens cover, and then if you want to take macro, you could click it again, and then it physically shifts the lens forward to take macro photos. So this camera doesn't have autofocus, but because it is such a small sensor camera, relatively wide angle, and it also doesn't, it's f3.0, pretty much everything is in focus unless you do want macro. Now, one feature that I feel like could have been nice for them to have added, I mean, in 2006 it would have been easy to do, is when you open the viewfinder, I feel like the camera should also turn on, because you could still turn on the camera with the power button, but the viewfinder stays closed. And I don't know when you'd want to have a camera on, but the viewfinder is still closed. So I feel like if you somehow combine the power switch with the viewfinder, that would have been great. Now the whole camera is made out of, I think, plastic. Now it feels like plastic everywhere, but the front, if you look closely, it looks like it has this brushed aluminum type of slightly reflective material here. I don't know if you can see that. Now, I think what this is just one of those plastic effects that you can have. I don't know quite how you do it, but I've seen different plastic things that have this similar type of effect, but it's still plastic. But because there's nothing online about this camera, I might be wrong. This could be metal, and one thing that does kind of sway me and confuse me a little bit is it feels slightly cold to the touch on this front panel here, where it does not on the rest of the camera. So maybe it has a thin piece of metal there, just like a thin metal front, or I don't know 100%, but I'm not sure why it would scratch this easily though, because I do see some scratches on the front. So hey, not quite sure. But I do know like metal refrigerators can scratch too, so I don't know. On the top, you have a microphone, you have your power button, you have a shutter button. That's pretty much it. There is no zoom. If you do want to zoom, there's a digital zoom, which you can use with these buttons here, left and right. But I wouldn't recommend using digital zoom because the sensor in here is only a 3.1 megapixel sensor. So you're not really gonna get too much reach out of this thing. You have a mode button right over here, which you can press to cycle between photo mode, playback mode, video mode, and setup mode. You can access the self-timer by pressing up. And one interesting quirk about this camera is it's got its normal 10-second self-timer. It's got the normal 3-second self-timer, but there's also a double self-timer mode, which creates a photo after 10 seconds. And then 3 seconds after that first photo is taken, it takes another photo, which is kind of odd, but hey, it's interesting. I mean, I guess if somebody like closes their eyes or somebody wants to do a second pose or something like that, it could be useful for that. You've got a flash, obviously, right here on the front. And then by pressing the OK button, you access some of the different things you can adjust. For example, exposure, which is kind of nice for those photographers who want to have a little bit more control over their camera. Now this camera doesn't have any manual control, but at least you can change the brightness of the image, the exposure. You can also change the white balance. It doesn't let you dial it in exactly, but you can work with the presets. So like if you select daylight, that's equivalent to like 5600 Kelvin. There is also a photo frame feature, which is really outdated for like nowadays standards. It's got a number of frames. It takes some time to load in. There we go. I wouldn't really recommend using it, but if you want to use it, this is what one of the frames looks like. And it's got a number of other frames, so it's like, honestly, I wouldn't use it. I like to have the regular image intact and then have the flexibility later to do what I want with it. You could find better frames online nowadays for sure. Now this camera does also shoot video. The video quality looks like this. This is a video test using this camera right now, the Braun D310. What's interesting is if you point at the sun, it's a black dot there. So I don't want to do that too much because I don't think that's good for the camera. Yeah, I wouldn't really use the video quality for anything, but hey, it does have an aesthetic, so there's that. One of the quirks with this camera is that it has the ability to set your resolution all the way up to 5 megapixels, but the marketing here on the front says 3.1 megapixels, so I was a little confused. Turns out that it actually only has a 3.1 resolution sensor for megapixels, and when you switch it to be anything higher than that, so if you set it to 5 megapixels, it just upscales the image, but it's really only shot at 3.1 megapixels anyways, so there's no point. It's kind of a waste of space. Also, when you physically turn on the camera, there is a startup image which you can enable and disable from the setup. Now, the startup image is really weird though, because it's just this random conference. Here, I'll show you a close-up image of it. I never took that photo. I don't know if the previous owner of this camera took that photo, because I did buy it just for this review, but like I don't know what that image is, and it's not on the SD card and it's not stored locally on the camera. So I don't know what that image is, but hey, it shows up when you turn the camera on. Now, one other quirk with this camera is it only worked with my 512 megabyte SD card. This SD card is the smallest SD card that I have. Anything bigger than that, so like I tried multiple 2 gigabyte cards, none of those worked. It had to be this 512 gig one. So if you're looking at picking up this camera, make sure you have a small SD card like that handy. Otherwise, you won't be able to write any photos onto this thing. It also runs on AAA batteries, which is nice because old cameras like these, if they run on a lithium-ion battery, those start degrading. AAAs, they never, you know, you can buy brand new AAAs nowadays too, and it runs like new. At the bottom, you do have a quarter 20. You have a tripod mount down here, which is nice. So if you want to mount it on a tripod, you're good to go. It is made out of plastic, so just be careful when you're putting it on there and taking it off. You don't want to be too harsh to strip it. Mine is perfectly intact. It actually doesn't look like it's been used before, so that's kind of nice. You have an LED indicator light up front for the self timer and when you turn the camera on and off. And you have these like little things down here. Those are just aesthetic, they're not lights, and I've been trying to figure out how to get those lights to turn on. They're not lights, and maybe they are, but they look slightly different than where the actual LED indicator is, and I haven't been able to turn it on. So I think that's just like a purely aesthetic like type of touch. So to wrap up, what makes this camera special? Why am I reviewing it? It's just a random camera, right? Yes, it is a random camera, and I love reviewing random cameras, but also it is unique in the way that there is so little documentation of this thing. You could try to do a little bit of research online and you won't find pretty much anything about this thing. It's like this camera doesn't exist on the internet. It's like those forgotten songs, for example, where like they're not on Spotify or Apple Music or any streaming platform, and then someone uploads a sample of it and it's like, where's that song from? It's exactly that kind of feeling, which I feel makes this camera kind of like a little collectible piece. And it also just so happens to take film-like, interesting, unique 2000s-esque photos. It's a unique little type of thing. Anyways, I hope you enjoyed this video. If you did, be sure to leave a thumbs up and check out some of the videos on my channel as well. If you really like it, do consider subscribing, and I will see you guys next time. Ciao.